there in the coffee shop.
Welcome to our final session of the day. Whether you've been here with us since the morning or have just joined us for this session, we're very, very happy to have all of you with and for Professor S.N. Sridhar and Professor Meena Sridhar. I'm Juan Hong from Asian and Asian American Studies, and it's a great honor to convene this conversation. I'm going to give you a difficult time.
I know, I'm afraid of you.
Yeah.
Shall I hide under the desk?
So before we begin, I actually want to share small memories with you, if that's okay. These moments, you probably wouldn't even remember them, but they mean a great deal to me. So Meena, more than 20 years ago, when I first got to Stony Brook as a wife of a PhD student, I was not even a student, you most graciously let me sit in your world English class.
Oh my God.
And
see what a nice person I am.
This is the book that I bought, the first book that I bought in the United States. Yes, we used this book in your class. So thank you, Meena. Sridhar, years later.
What did I do?
After I joined the Department of Asian and Asian American Studies as a faculty member, I bumped into you in the hallway, and I think you were just leaving for the day, and then I came back from my teaching, and I was a little, you just simply said, Jiwan, keep doing what you have been doing. So, I was a little lost at the moment about what I was doing, and your words encouraged me greatly. So thank you so much for your kindness.
Thank you.
So now to begin our conversation, we've been hearing a lot about you all day long. I want to give you the chance to speak. We really want to hear from you, right? So I'd like to kind of step back and look at the remarkable breadth of your scholarly lives first. You've each contributed to so many fields. We all now are very, very familiar with what you have been doing. But more than that, you actually built bridges among them. So when you look back, how do these old threads connect in hindsight? Sridhar, would you like to begin?
Okay, thank you first of all for your kind words and not for not revealing anything embarrassing. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank Agnes and Erico and all the other people who have been, Chicago, and all the other people who have been putting so much work to organize this event. To answer your question, the Indian tradition, there are two basic scholarly approaches to doing things. One is to go in depth into one small, narrow area and to become the world's expert in that. The other one is to do several things to have a more broad-based, multidisciplinary approach. The Indian approach is the latter. And often you're trained to do several things at once. And so when we came to India, to Illinois, to America, one of the things that I was exposed to was my mentors, Professor Braj Kachru and Yamuna Kachru. And Braj followed the second approach. That is, he was broad in his approach. And Yamuna, on the other hand, was more narrowly focused on one topic, and she became the expert on Hindi syntax. And of course, eventually she expanded. And the same thing that we did with, so we were exposed to both types of things. And so I've always looked at my work on language as integrative. So when I'm doing morphology, for instance, I bring in multilingualism. So, for example, there are some derivational affixes in Kannada morphology, and they are intimately influenced by multilingualism because the borrowings from one language, Sanskrit, undergo one type of change. Borrowings from Persian, they undergo a second type of change. Borrowings from English, they undergo a third type of change. And so unless you know multilingualism, you can't do morphology properly. So similarly, I have done that with syntax and with psycholinguistics and with sociolinguistics and with world Englishes and even literary stylistics. So in each of them, I try to bring in the perspectives from the others and try to make, to illuminate one in the light of the other. And therefore, the idea has been to integrate these things rather than separate them.
Yeah. So what stays with me from your reflection is how committed you have been to seeing language in its full complexity as well as its wholeness. So
yes,
it's wonderful. Great.
exactly.
Nina, would you like to share your reflections?
Well, I grew up in a multilingual family. Spoke many languages, Hindi, Bengali, Bhojpuri, Marathi, and later on learned Kannada after getting married to him, and he insisted I learn. So like a good wife, I learned Kannada also. And I'm glad I did. Nobody can gossip about me anymore. So that perspective stayed with me. And then when I came to Illinois, and my mentors, my sister Yamuna Kachru and Professor Braj Kachru, brilliant people, they sort of encouraged me to do more sociolinguistics because I had many questions about language. Why do we say it this way? Will I be able to retain my language? Will my niece Amita, who's here, will she learn Hindi like me, or will she forget language? So my sister said, you are more interested in sociolinguistics, so you concentrate on that. And I took many courses. First course in sociolinguistics where Tej was also a student. You remember, you, me, Sridhar and Ahmed Siddiqui, we were all, Rajeshwari, we all used to sit in the back and contemplate about languages. And so from there grew my interest in requesting strategies in Indian English, my interest in how language multilinguals use their language, their linguistic repertoire, and what happens in a multilingual society. You don't use the same language over and over again. You learn the different languages. As a child, you learned different languages. My neighbors said, if you don't speak Bengali, you can't play with me. My Hindi speaker said, you have to learn Hindi. At home, mother said, you cannot speak any other language other than English. In school, they taught us Gaelic. So, yeah, the nuns only spoke Gaelic, so I spoke Gaelic. And when I came home, my mother thought I was speaking gibberish, until the nuns said, no, it's not gibberish, it's Gaelic. So multilingualism became my focus, and I concentrated
Right. So
on that.
multilingualism has been a central and integral part of your life and scholarship, right?
Right.
So, and you both explored multilingualism through many different lenses: structural,
Right.
cognitive, social, cultural, educational, even literary. So I want to ask you this question: what does multilingualism mean to you today after decades of research and teaching?
Okay. Should I go first?
Yes, yes.
Always first, men.
You were.
No, I'm going to change the order later.
Now she was making me nervous. Multilingualism for me is a beautiful thing. It's a thing of beauty. Language itself is a thing of beauty for me. Exploring language in all its multidimensional aspects, whether it's syntax, whether it's morphology, whether it's semantics, whether it's pragmatics, whether it is variation, and second language acquisition, and so on and so forth. All of these things have been beautiful for me. The beauty lies in the fact that multilingualism reveals or is a reflection of the capacity of the human mind to be adaptive to different circumstances. And it allows a human being to express a multidimensional, diverse personality. And so multilingualism is essential to democracy because it preserves diversity and at the same time allows you to communicate with one another. And it also is necessary because in a country like India, where you have a composite culture, you have the wonderful legacy of Sanskrit, one of the greatest and most beautiful, most rich classical languages like Chinese and Arabic and Hebrew and so on and so forth, all of these things, Spanish and English, etc. So there is the Sanskrit legacy. And then there is the legacy of Persian, which is also extremely important in the history of India, because the Muslim culture has influenced and molded Indian culture, and it's a composite hybrid culture, whether it's food or music or language and literature and so on. And then for modernization and globalization and all that, we have English. And anybody who does not have all of these things is not a complete Indian. And also, if, on the other hand, you have to navigate, you have to negotiate all of these things. And if any one of them is emphasized to the detriment of the other, immediately there is a rebellion. So, for example, if you say that Hindi will be the national language, Hindi is not the national language of India, it's an official language, like English. There is no national language of India in the constitution. All the major languages are national languages. So if you say that Hindi is the national language and if you don't know Hindi, then you are not an Indian, immediately everybody gets angry. Every non-Hindi speaker gets angry. They will say, we will secede from this union and become a separate country. That's serious. And so you cannot, the moment any one of these elements is imposed, for example, if English is imposed and you say that you must do this, then there will be a rebellion. On the other hand, you leave them alone and they will learn these things on their own. So multilingualism is, I think, beautiful because it allows you to express many layers of your meaning, many aspects or many dimensions of your personality. And it is also essential for keeping India a democracy.
So your reflection really broadens our understanding of multilingualism, not just as a natural human condition of societies, but also as some sort of a democratic force that sustains the balance among multiple linguistic and cultural influences. Thank you, Sridhar. Nina, from your perspective, what does multilingualism mean to you now, today?
To me, that's life. The more languages you learn, the more languages you speak, the more you understand your neighbor, everybody else. And then you don't have this perspective that, oh, this language is poor or this person is uncultured. You don't have that perspective. And to me, that's very important, especially if you're in the teaching profession. You have to treat all students equally. I'll give you one small example. When I first came to Stony Brook, one of the teachers came to me and said, I have 25 Chinese students in my class, and I gave them all English names. And I was shocked beyond belief, but I wanted to teach them a lesson. I didn't say anything, but next day I said, because I'm Indian, I'm going to give you all Indian names. And I gave each student an Indian name. And the one who really said that statement to me when she came into my office, I said, Arundhati, bring me that file, please. And she looked around, there was nobody else, and she said, are you talking to me? I said, of course, your name is Arundhati. She said, no, my name is Mary. I said, no, your name is Arundhati, but I don't recognize it. I said, well, what about your Chinese students? That was a kind of a learning moment for her. So multilingualism is very important. I told her that you need to be aware of all languages and respect languages. You cannot mold them into your own way of life. So for me, multilingualism is the way I breathe. I want to hear all languages. I enjoy languages.
Yeah, so what I love, from hearing both of you, is how multilingualism is fundamentally grounded in lived experiences. And with that foundation, I would like you to talk about how your research, particularly in multilingualism, has made a real-world influence on people, including the example that you just shared with us. So Sridhar, if you could share some examples or experiences when your research, particularly multilingualism, has made.
There are so many examples one could give, but I'll give a couple of them. That's all. One is somebody. I think it was Professor Kingsley Bolton who said that one of the most important things we have done in our scholarly career is to bridge disciplines. Similarly, multilingualism is very important for bridging the academic life with public life. And that's also something that we have tried to do. And one example is how the public perception, Tej Bhatia talked about this, public perception of language mixing is negative. That way people want pure languages. They don't want people to mix languages. And secondly, people want the native speaker's version of a language. They don't want non-native speaker's version of a language. And so these are two examples of that. And also there is, within Kannada, speaking of my language, there is a trend to make Kannada, pure Kannada, to remove or eliminate or purge Kannada of all the influences of foreign languages such as Sanskrit in particular. Now Sanskrit is so integral to Kannada, 60% of Kannada vocabulary is Sanskrit if you are really cultured sort of. And so removing Sanskrit is kind of, cutting off your heart and then saying that I'll be a human being. Similarly, with regard to this idea of purism, and if you, as Professor Hoberman said, if you observe how people use language, there is a great deal of mixing of one language with another, and that is the norm, not the exception. But instead, the grammars insist on purism, and in fact, there was a time when in English medium schools, if you use a non-English word, your mother tongue word, you would be fined. And in fact, even the French Academy went as far as to say that every borrowed word from English should be fined. And it didn't come to anything, but that was the law that was proposed. So like this, there is an attempt or an insistence on purism, purity, and abhorrence of mixing and so on. But anybody who has worked on language, and in fact some great people have worked on language like Einar Haugen and Roland Barthes and all these people, they have said that hybridity is central to language. And so similarly with regard to non-native varieties of English, people insisted that the native speaker's variety is the only standard variety. Which native speaker? British native speaker or American native speaker or Australian native speaker? And so which marginalizes the majority of people who speak English, the majority of the people who learn English, and so on. So there was a great movement pioneered by Professor Kachru and Larry Smith and Kingsley and Daniel and all of these people, Tej and so on, so who have done a lot of work on this to show the legitimacy of non-native varieties of English if you look at language in terms of usage rather than in terms of preconceived ideology. And so there are many ways in which our linguistic research has something to say to public debates about public perceptions of what is correct, what is better, what is beautiful, and so on and so forth. And our research tries to contribute to this.
Right. So thank you so much for your pioneering work on this, dismantling all these myths about language and language learning so that we actually learn how to challenge all these widely held assumptions and language ideologies. Also, you have opened up a new way of looking at language and languaging, as Agnes has pointed out today. So Mina, you have been deeply engaging with the communities, the language educators and language learners as well, right? So how do you think research can or should inform the public, especially on language policy or language education or even linguistic hierarchy that we have been talking about today?
Yeah, the work with Professor Kachrus has made me very aware that while people talk about, my profession is teaching English as a second language. I have trained practically every English teacher on Long Island in 20 years or so, 30 years or so, starting with Lois, right? And there was a time when I was invited to Brooklyn to test English of Bengali speakers, Punjabi speakers, and other speakers who were speaking different languages. And they were labeled as deficient in English. They were not really deficient in English. They were speaking Indian English, Jamaican English, Trinidadian English, which is called talkie-talkie. And so when I made the teachers aware that this is not deficient English or bad English, but this is the way English is used in these countries, just like Australian English is different from American English. In the beginning, there was a lot of resistance, but later on, they invited me to give talks about this. I gave maybe about 150 talks, both Sridhar and me, to the teachers in Nassau County, Suffolk County, Manhattan, other places, about world Englishes.
Yeah,
So that's how I have tried to change the philosophy about language.
So you actually have helped many of us who are here, teaching language in our department, in other departments on campus. Thank you. Now, I would like to talk about something that many of us are probably very curious about. How many years have you been married?
51 years.
Wow.
As of October.
So then, Meena, what's the habit of Sridhar's that you hate the most? Oh, no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, the interview is taking a different turn.
Hey, we limit it to world English.
So you've not only
I can give a long list.
I have a longer one. Don't worry.
So we'll save that for dinner. So you've not only shared a life together, but in many ways a scholarly journey as well. What has it been like to think, write, and teach alongside each other over the years? Meena.
When I was in Queen's College, at least I had different gossips. Now, now when I came to Stony Brook, the gossip part disappeared. Not that I gossiped much, but I would comment on English
It's
language.
the same gossip.
Yeah.
Same people.
Yeah, things have changed since I came to Stony Brook. So it's mostly about teaching, mostly about what aspect is this interesting to you? How are we going to approach this paper? We are constantly getting requests from our dear friend Kingsley and others saying, would you like to contribute to this volume and that volume from India? And so our dinner table conversations, and most of the conversations are about how are we going to write this paper about bridging the paradigm gap. What points, he would say, okay, you write down points, I write down points, and then we sit down together and thrash it out. Sometimes I disagree with him vehemently. Sometimes he says, no, this is not the way to do it. But then we compromise over a cup of coffee.
Oh, that's such a warm
that's
sense of how your scholarly and family lives have been intertwined.
Yeah.
How about you, Sridhar? How has it been for you?
She has already said that because there is really no separation between our academic life and our other life. Yeah.
What other life?
So, there is no other life, exactly. And so many people have that, if you work in a factory, for example, 9 to 5 you work and then you go home and it's entirely different. But for an academic, it's not different. You're thinking about that in the evenings and over the weekends and over the vacations and so on. It's the same thing. And so there has been no such strict separation, except when, friends call, our relatives call, and relatives visit and things like that. And so, but on the other hand, what I would like to say is that although we have worked on similar things and sometimes the same things and published a number of joint papers, but we have also published a number of papers individually. So, for example, Meena works on language maintenance, and I don't work on language maintenance at all. And she has done a lot of work on administration in terms of teaching English training people to be teachers of English, their master's programs and so on and so forth. And I don't do much of that. On the other hand, I work on Kannada language and literature. And I have written a grammar of Kannada and a lot of papers on syntax and semantics and phonetics, not phonetics, phonology and morphology in particular. And so she doesn't work on those things. And I have also worked on Kannada literature, especially translation of both contemporary novels into English and contemporary poetry into English, as well as classical Kannada literature into English. And she doesn't work on that, although she contributes to the improvement of that and so on. So there is a great deal of overlap in what we do, and so we do fight about things, as she said, but we also have a sufficient number of different interests so that we are not always doing the same thing.
So having reflected on your legacy so far, I would like to turn to the future. So looking ahead, what kind of linguistic scholarship do you hope will grow out of your generation's work, and what kind of questions do you hope we will keep asking, especially in this very rapidly changing landscape and highly polarized and confusing world? Sridhar?
Okay. This is a very interesting question. I'm not a futurologist, but I have some very strong convictions about what kind of linguistics is useful and what kind of linguistics is necessary. And so I will say a couple of words about that. One is, when you look at, for example, the Chomskyan revolution was fantastic. It completely changed the nature of language and linguistic research. And India, on the other hand, comes from, as Tej said, there is a 3,000-year-old, the richest linguistic tradition in the history of the world. And so that linguistic tradition is partly the same as the kind of thing that Chomsky did. For example, Chomsky actually talks about it, the Paninian tradition. And on the other hand, there are a number of things that the Chomskyan tradition does not do, but that is necessary for Indian linguistics. So, for example, in the beginning, the Chomskyan research was mostly about English and European languages. And when it extended a little bit, it went to Japanese and Korean and a little bit about Chinese, but not to too many other languages. But then there are 7,000 languages in the world, and a lot of the languages are in India. And many of these languages don't even have a basic grammar, they don't even have a basic dictionary, they don't even have a basic textbook. And so how relevant is Chomskyan linguistics to Indian linguistics? So I think it's very important that good comprehensive grammars be written for these languages, and all these other materials be developed. And so all this discussion about whether island constraints work in a particular language and whether they work in Indian languages, I call that the prostitution model of language, linguistic research. That is, you are using an example from some language, using it, and then after that you have no interest in that language at all, but you're only interested in whether it proves your linguistic theory, that particular hypothesis at that point or not, which may be disproved 2 years later. So the language was used but did not get any benefit from that. So I think the kind of linguistics that we need is linguistics that will benefit the speakers of the language and not simply the theory of the language. That is number one. A second thing that, I don't know if I should go on.
Yes, we have enough time, yeah.
Yeah, the second thing that I think needs to be done is in terms of linguistics related to the use of language and not simply the structure of the language. I worked for a long time on the structure of the language, and I published in the best journals like Language and Linguistic Inquiry and things like that on the structure. So I'm speaking as a person who is familiar with both this and the other side. But I think structure is not enough. You need use, function as well. So form and function should be related in any decent grammar of a language. And that is the ideal kind of grammar. And that is the kind of linguistics that we should be doing. And the third thing would be that language should not be looked at in isolation, but many languages exist in negotiation with one another. 2, 3 languages. Most of the people in the world are multilingual. And so we should be writing multilingual grammars, not just as separate grammars for each language. That's not the way we think. The languages are not hermetically sealed from one another in the mind of the bilingual, but they interact, and together we produce meanings which are richer because each one has been influenced by the other. And that is the kind of thing that we should try to analyze. And so that is what these large language models should also be approaching. Because, for example, if you look at large language models and if you think that, okay, there is Google Translate and so you don't need any translation of classics, which is ridiculous, because Google Translate only works on the basis of, Chomsky calls it plagiarism, because it only works on the basis of material that has already been input in digital form in the computer. And if there is none, then it will not help. So, for example, most of the languages of the world have no digital presence on the internet. So what will happen to all this Google Translate? And also the translation involves a tremendous amount of cultural nuances, the kind of thing that Professor Davis talked about with regard to a very close reading of these examples. So unless you do that sort of thing, language is, it just becomes a game and something that you get a job for, and that you have not contributed anything to the enrichment of human beings. I think I'll stop.
Mina, would you like to continue?
A lot of linguistic research focuses on language devoid of culture. That was my impression as I was taking courses and thinking about languages. And I'll give you a very small example. I was observing a classroom at the University as part of my master's training program at the University of Illinois, a school called Martin Luther King Jr. School. And the children were being tested on Piagetian tasks, that there are 2 containers and there's water in them. And is the water level here is up to this point, but the water level here is up to this point. Which one has more water? And there were 2 children from Sierra Leone, brother and 2 brothers, and the younger brother got the big one with the more water, and the younger brother got more water and the older brother got less water. And so the teacher would ask them, who has more water? And the younger brother would always say, my brother has more water. He could visually see it, but because his culture told him not to brag. And I couldn't, and the teachers thought there was something wrong with his eyesight. And they were recommending, eye exam for him. So I went to Professor Bokamba, a very well-known African studies professor, and I asked him, Yamba, what's going on here? He said, in our African culture, which is also true about many Asian cultures, that you don't brag. You say that your brother, who's older than you, has more than you. He's wiser than you. He's better looking than you, right? You never compare yourself. And so this is the kind of knowledge that you need in language. It's not enough, structure is not enough to convey meaning. In order to convey meaning, you need to know more about the culture. I have thousands of examples like that, where I have observed that children are sometimes labeled, they lack the necessary IQ skills to be good learners. They observe their culture, they follow their culture, and we should not penalize them. And that's my message to future researchers.
Thank you so much, Meena. Now I would like to open the floor and then invite some questions from the audience. So this is a conversation with the audience.